Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn. Today I have for you a Mighty game review of Mad Max. I'm actually a big Mad Max fan and actually took quite pleasure in actually playing this game and checking it out for the first time. Finally, been meaning to do so for years, and yeah, I just kind of finally got around to it. But let's talk a little bit about the game, and I'll give you my review of what I liked, what I disliked, and what I felt was pretty much neutral. We shall start with the developer is Avalanche Studios, and the publisher is Warner Brothers Interactive, because Warner Brothers holds the license for Mad Max. You can kind of say, unfortunately, in some regards, but that's a whole political schmeal I don't want to get into, mostly having to do with the movies. It was released September 2015 for Windows PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. You're watching a review for the PC version. And then it was released October 2016 for Linux and Mac OS. Alright, generally the idea is you go into the wasteland, you take control of Max after he had his car taken from him, as well as all of his equipment. And in the process, you meet Chum, who actually has plans to build a car called the Magnum Opus. And basically, the idea is you run around the wasteland, killing people, collecting scrap, collecting experience, things of that nature, and upgrading Max through perks, Max's equipment, as well as the Magnum Opus itself. Generally, that is the premise, and he is actually trying to make his way into the Plane of Silence, which he has to get through Gastown to do so. The game actually has a pretty big map with many different locations to go through, so there's a lot of secondary stuff as well as the primary story itself. So far, from what I can tell, I'm not done with the game. I'm about 60 hours into it, give or take. And there's actually still quite a bit of stuff to do. There's a lot of secondary stuff, but from what I can tell, the story is actually really not that long. I was seeing stuff that people was completing the game under 20 hours. I suspect that we're not doing every single thing, trying to get all the different collectibles, trying to pick up every piece of scrap they run across. Things of that nature, plus do all the secondary objectives and things of that nature. Now, generally speaking, for the most part, being 60 hours in, my car is almost completely fully upgraded. There's still a couple tasks I have to do to grab a couple of the upgrades, but generally speaking, I have almost everything unlocked at this point, or at least in my point of the game. And unfortunately, I do not have any footage actually of my current car as part of this replay, because actually I just got the Big Chief tonight, which is the V8 engine. So let's dive on in here. How do I feel about the game? Well, I liked the graphics. Generally speaking, the cars looked Mad Max. You know, they did a good job with that. They had rust effects on some of the vehicles. You could tell mostly what you were looking at, although it was hard to make out some of the vehicle upgrades. Mostly because some of the vehicle upgrades really just were not that noticeable. In general, it wasn't a graphics failure, but like the first upgrade for the spiked rims, the rims had pretty much, the spikes were extremely small and just hard to see. It looked like somebody just welded nails to the rim, and that was about it. Sounds, I do enjoy the sounds. The shotgun sounds like a shotgun. The sniper rifle sounds like a sniper rifle. Kicking someone's face in sounds like kicking someone's face in. You can tell the difference in sound between the V6 and the V8, so on and so forth. The driving mechanics, you will spend a ton of time in this game driving. I would say 60 to 70% of my game so far has been driving, probably closer to 70% to be honest. A lot of vehicle combat in the game as well. And the driving mechanics, for the most part, is a pleasure. The racing mechanics are a little different for some odd reason, and I will get to that in a bit. But the cars just drive solid. Uh, Lack of weapons in the game. Generally, Max himself only carries a shotgun and shivs. Now, every once in a while, you can come across a melee weapon. It might be some kind of makeshift axe or a club or whatever. That item does break, and most of the time, you'll just kind of throw that item off to the side unless you absolutely need to use it. And it's not something Max carries with him. So, generally speaking, Max only carries 2 weapons, unless you count his knuckle dusters. And I actually do like the fact that there's a lack of weapons. Now, for the car, you can use the shotgun as well. Very Mad Max-like. There is a harpoon launcher, which actually has a cable. There's also an explosive harpoon head that you can use. They call it the Thunderpoon. I'm trying to remember what else. There's also the side burners, which is like these pipes that shoot out flame that attach to the car. You also got the ramming spikes. You got the spiked rims. Generally speaking, though, there's not a whole ton of weapons to the game. There's actually very few. And generally, in the realm of firearms alone, there's only a sniper rifle, which you can only use when you're in the car. And then there's a shotgun, which you can use running around on foot or as driving, as I said earlier. Car and character models look really good, feel very Mad Max-like. The Magnum Opus, I decided I went with the, I believe the chassis is called the Wild Hunt. And basically, it looks like the Mad Max V8 Interceptor. But there's other cars and other chassis in the game that you can earn and you can unlock. And they basically look like they're right out of Mad Max. And generally speaking, without diving too much into the background, they're actually generally are Mad Max. They're actually early concept vehicles that were going to be used for Mad Max Fury Road. Not going to get into that. It's just a whole schmeal. And once again, it's got to do with politics between George Miller and Warner Brothers Studios. Combat is similar to the Batman games, the Arkham games. However, I feel it is much better. Basically, your combat is 3 buttons. You have a strike button, which you can tap it to strike, or you can hold it down to do a harder strike, a heavy strike per se. There's a button there to do reversals and blocks, and then there is a button for dodging. Now, this is where I feel it's better than Batman. With the Arkham games, you basically can spam the strike button, and Batman will do all kinds of crazy, flippy, twirly shit. You don't have to face the enemies. You don't even have to point Batman in the direction of the enemies when doing this stuff. Just spam one button, and Batman will just do all the rest. It looks very cool, very Hollywood, very Batman-like. However, for Mad Max, while they went with a similar premise, you also have to use your directional button to tell Max what direction to face and throw a punch. And honestly, it makes the combat feel a lot better. Also, Max himself, he doesn't do any flippy, twirly, kung fu shit. He does do a little bit of jujitsu. However, that being said, if you know anything about Mad Max, he was a cop, and cops would have a little training in jujitsu at least. For the most part, though, Max is just a brawler. He just goes in, swings a bunch of punches. He will use whatever's around to help him. You know, if you get an enemy up against some railing, he will beat the enemy against the railing. He will smash their heads on walls, things of that nature. He will also do different types of chokeholds on the ground and things like that as well. There is also a Fury mode, which is kind of like I don't know how to put it, more like a supercharged mode or a turbo mode, where Basically, Max gets his Agent Orange all jacked up, and he just goes in and starts wrecking shit. Um, there's there's a there's tons of different tasks you can do in the game, and they're all different things to do. Right now, you're watching footage of me trying to clear out a minefield. This is one of the tasks you have to do: is clear out minefields, so you can help the local warlord take control of the territory. Um, there is task that has to do with racing. There's tasks that has to do with looting. There's just so many different things you can do. There's different rescue missions. There's tasks where you have to find someone, and they'll give you tips on how to infiltrate a base. So lots of different tasks. The vehicle combat, generally speaking, the vehicle combat's pretty good, and it feels pretty much Mad Max. Basically, you're smashing the crap out of vehicles. You're trying to dodge. You're trying to keep your vehicle running as long as you can and try to outrun. If you get too many opponents, you try to outrun those opponents. You do things like shoot exposed gas tanks if they have exposed gas tanks with the shotgun. You can rip off their wheels when you have the level of the harpoon high enough. But basically, generally speaking, everything is built around ramming vehicles to death. And it works out pretty good, and it feels pretty smooth and streamlined for how the game is set up. Once again, that also helps with the driving mechanics. It does have a survival element to it. As you can see, the little red bar on the left-hand corner is actually my health, and how I regenerate my health is from food and water. So there's something right there. Actually, nice Mad Max 2 callback. You actually some of the food you eat is actually cans of Dickie D dog food. Yeah. And like I said, there's water. Plus, you carry a canteen with you that you can fill with water as well. Also, as part of the survival element is there's generally a lack of ammo. Now it gets better and you find ammo more commonly as you progress through the game. But in the very beginning part of the game, I was obviously I was ready to go off in a corner and polish the old torpedo when I found a shotgun shell, mind you, while I have a double barrel shotgun. So not even enough ammo to load a double barrel shotgun. It can get quite difficult. Plus your shivs, which are basically makeshift knives, is part of your ammo stash as well. And even finding those in the beginning of the early part of the game was quite difficult. Interactive buildings. And what I mean by that is there's towers, different types of towers. One is more or less a defense tower where they'll sling out Molotov cocktails at you. There's also just a tower. It's just they call it a scarecrow, and it's basically just a marker of the war boss that you're trying to deal with. And you actually have to destroy those buildings and rip those buildings down. Also, there is strongholds, and as you progress through the game, you will take time and upgrade these strongholds, which actually helps Max in the end, such as making ammunition benches, water collectors, stuff of that nature. Game music feels like pretty much something directly out of Mad Max. Any of the, essentially watch any of the movies, the old ones, the new one, it feels like it's from Mad Max. Now, the neutral parts of the game, or what I felt was kind of good, kind of bad, it just kind of shoots the middle. And honestly, it seems like there's no point to the fuel system. I understand why the cars have fuel. As you can see there's actually a little gas gauge, just the yellow bar on the right-hand side with the gas that's above the gas tank. Every once in a while, I'd like jack an enemy car, and it would be low on fuel. But generally speaking, for myself, I've never had problems finding fuel or keeping my cars basically topped off at all times. I'm not sure if maybe I played on a harder difficulty, uh, that would become a problem. But basically, generally speaking, they added a fuel system for the cars, and generally speaking, there was, to me, from what I've seen, there was no point to the fuel system. But it's still cool that they added it because it was also an important part of the Mad Max franchise, especially the Road Warrior. Uh, the first 2 or 3 hours of the game, let me just directly say, is boring as fuck. It's a lot of cutscenes, it's a lot of hand holding. Um, Basically, it's just a lot of premise of trying to set up the story so you can play the game. But realistically, once you get past those 2, 3 hours where you get past the point of the hand holding and it's trying to explain the different things to you and it's trying to establish the story, you can really run through the game. So basically, my first 2 or 3 hours of playing the game was actually quite boring, and I was actually getting to the point where I really wasn't happy with the game. Um, but then once I cleared the tutorial stuff and the game actually opened up to me, it got really exciting, and basically I've been playing nonstop. There really hasn't been any cutscenes. There's been only a couple here and there. And generally speaking, I've had full control of Max through the game since. So that's why it's one of those. It's a negative to me, but because of how the game opens up and plays throughout, after you get past those 2 or 3 hours, I guess it's really not bad. And I understand what they were trying to do, which was just establish the story and get you playing the game and enjoying the game, and that makes it worthwhile. Car upgrades can be a bit grindy. The understand that the upgrades for Max, the different fighting techniques and skills, the ammo bandolier, the body armor upgrades, all that different stuff are really, really dirt cheap. But then the car upgrades, they start off really cheap at first, but then they get to the point where they're really expensive. Now, they're not really extremely grindy. I mean, I've played games that were way grindier. But when you compare the Max upgrades, well, Max's equipment upgrades versus car upgrades, they are a bit grindy. The next thing I want to point out too, and I almost feel this is a negative, but I probably because of the mechanics, I can kind of understand why they wouldn't have done it. But there is no motorcycles in the game, and that kind of feels like a disappointment when you go back to look at the different Mad Max movies, especially the Road Warrior as well as Fury Road. There was almost as many motorcycles as cars, if not more in some cases. So it kind of feels like a disappointment that there was no motorcycles put into the game, and it would have been nice if they maybe would have added motorcycles in the game through a DLC or something, some way, but it's never happened. Dislikes. Tasks do get a bit repetitive, especially towards the late game. Understand that you have to loot camps as part of your task. You're trying to loot camps and get scraps so you can continue upgrading your car. Well, there's an achievement where you have to loot like 191 camps. So if that gives you any idea, you got to go through the process and take out the different scarecrows, which is the steel towers, the markers I was talking about earlier, and there's quite a few of those on the map. The only tasks that really don't get repetitive, and probably because it's such a damn nuisance, is dealing with minefields. Um, and then the bases, the general bases themselves really don't get repetitive because the bases, all the different bases, have different layouts and different objectives and optional objectives and things of that nature. But it's so I guess maybe not so much the task gets repetitive, but it's just that going from the different locations for collecting scrap and things of that nature does get a bit repetitive. Um, I don't know why. I'm not sure if this is a sound problem on my end or if there's a setting I have fucked, but there is no sounds when breaking objects. When breaking, there's like foot lockers you have to pry open with a pry bar. Um, I don't get a sound when doing that. There's also doors in the game that you just kick, you just bash through, or that you pry open. I don't get sounds for those either. So if anybody's got anything, let me know. But generally speaking, I have messed with the sounds a little bit, and I have not found a way to fix this. And I do feel that's a negative. Like, how did you oversight something so minor? Um, the racing mechanics, I don't understand this because the racing. So earlier I was talking about how great the driving mechanics were, but the racing mechanics are completely different from the driving mechanics. The cars just like go all over the place, and I have no fucking idea why. Like suddenly the car just feels like it's got the worst tires in the world or something. Like just they don't stay on the road. Even if you try to make them stay on the road, they won't stay on the road. Cars will spin out for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I literally was driving on a flat spot and I hit like a little pebble and the car did like a 180 for I don't know why. So driving mechanic or the racing mechanics, while it's worth doing the racing because essentially it gives you access to a point where you can constantly get fuel, is really annoying, and the mechanics I feel is really shitty and does not match the regular car combat driving mechanics of the game. Also, finally, my last dislike of the game, and I have no idea why this is the case, and this is the one of the few games that does it. This game auto saves very often. And it stutters almost every time it auto saves. And I don't lose the FPS or anything else, and it's not a performance issue from my PC. It is a performance issue definitely from the game. Um, so there you go. I'm not sure if that's a problem with console as well. I would suspect it probably is, considering sometimes it stuttered so hard where I actually thought that the game had froze or was going to freeze, lock up, or crash. Otherwise, I've had no crashes. No, I've seen no actual real game-breaking bugs. The Mad Max is $20 on Steam, and personally, even though I didn't pay $20 for it, I paid like $4 for it. I actually feel it's worth $20. However, that being said, if you don't feel like spending $20 on an older game, I would say wait for a sale. Pick it up for $5, or in my case, I picked it up for $4. That's American dollars, by the way. And honestly, I felt it was well worth the money. And looking back now, I would have spent the $20 to get Mad Max. Actually, kind of looking back now, I probably would have spent $60 to get Mad Max when it first dropped for console. But anyway, folks, that is my review of Mad Max. Generally speaking, it's a fun game, and it definitely really has the spirit of Mad Max. Anyway, folks, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Went a little long, but thank you very much for watching, and have yourself a great week.